Our topic of this workshop is really a light topic, but still an important one. So in continuation with the previous workshop and yesterday, I believe, by Dr. Mus'ab, the idea here is to familiarize the students and yourselves with the various types of punctuation that are used in the English language. And as you can see here, brackets and parentheses are also an important tool that the writer has and can employ in order to basically clarify things in his writing or her writing and achieve the maximum amount of clarity when producing any type of written material. Of course, these things, the brackets and the parentheses are, let's say, supplementary to the main tools of punctuation, such as commas, periods, colons, etc. Right, let me just display the chat here. Very good. Right, so let's get started with the first slide. Okay. So we're starting with parentheses, which are the most common type of, let's say, bracket that is used in the English language. And after parentheses, we have the square brackets. We will talk about them for a little bit, and those are basically the main two things that we will cover today. So parentheses and brackets. So parentheses, that's the plural, and the singular word is parenthesis. They are the most common of these punctuation marks, as I said. Now you can find them and type them on your keyboard by pressing the Shift key and number 9 or 0, so to left and right. So I would like you now to try and type them in the chat just to see if you are able to find them, if you are familiar with the way to access this type of punctuation mark. Let me just close the window. I suspect the noise from the outside is coming in. Apologize. But so as I was saying, you can access this or type it, the parentheses, by pressing the Shift key and the number 9 or number 0 on your keyboard. Obviously, that is if you are typing, and if you are writing by hand, that is much easier, obviously. Now, why do we use parentheses? What do they indicate? Parentheses are used to enclose information that can be left out. Now, that's the tricky thing here. How do I know if this information can be left out or not? So that's really up to the judgment of the writer, or up to your judgment. But essentially, you are trying to add information that is not, let's say, crucial to the sentence. So the question that you would ask yourself is, if I leave this information out, will the sentence still be fine? Now, if the answer to the question is yes, then one can say, or one can safely assume, that this type of information, whatever it is, can be enclosed within parentheses. So always ask yourself that question: can this information be left out and the sentence ending up being still fine, no issues with it? If the answer is yes, then you can safely assume that you can use parentheses for this type of information. Okay. So parentheses, to reiterate, they enclose material or materials that are an interruption, okay, of the text, but still an interruption that is adding new information or supplementary details, really. So you're adding further details to the sentence, okay? So it is, think of it as an interruption that interrupts the flow of the sentence to mention something or to bring up something or to add a detail to the sentence that is not essential, but you still feel the need that you should add that information. So again, as I said, the information in the parentheses, enclosed within the parentheses, is not essential to the meaning of the original sentence. It is given as additional or extra information. Now, do not think that, well, it is not, if it is not essential, I do not need to add that information. You need to think again, because oftentimes as writers and as people who try to present information, any type of information, you'll find yourself always wondering, should I add this? Should I leave this out? What should I do? Now, parentheses are here to help you. Now, if you are wondering or struggling with the decision of adding something to a sentence or to a line, you can always use parentheses and be done with that struggle, and just go ahead, open a parentheses or brackets and add whatever information you need to add, and then close that parentheses and continue. So it's really a useful tool for writers to have. Now, some information, further information about parentheses. Parentheses, they appear almost exclusively in pairs, meaning you never see them, or you almost never see them. There are obviously exceptions, but you always see them in pairs. And if you have the left one, you must close it. So if you open parentheses, you must end up closing it. Okay, so that's one of the major rules in using parentheses. They are sometimes employed in the same manner as commas, dashes. So they suggest de-emphasis. This is important. They suggest de-emphasis of the content within those parentheses. Again, that takes us back to the issue of is it essential information or is it not essential information? So the suggestion, when readers see parentheses, they think immediately, oh, this is supplementary information. This is not essential information. And that's the main indication of parentheses. So another use of parentheses is that they could frame plural endings to indicate that a word can be read either as singular or plural. For example, as in enter the title and now parentheses S of the documents, again parentheses S. Now in this occasion, in this example here, the indication is that document can be documents and title can be titles. Okay, so this is really a great use or a great tool to have. For example, if you are not sure about the is it singular or plural, if the option is still open for both, so both singular and plural, you can always enclose the plural S within the parentheses, and then you will be able to indicate that it can be plural and it can be singular. Now, another use is also to allow for gender neutral reading, especially in the English language. Many words can, be gender neutral, and in many contexts, especially nowadays, having a gender neutral sentence can be viewed as a positive thing. So, for example, next she or he, so you can read it both ways because the S is enclosed within the parentheses here. It can be either she or he in this case. Should consult with an advisor. So that's one of the other uses of parentheses here. So remember, now you have, so far we discussed two uses here. One is to indicate being either or having the option of being plural or singular. For example, like titles or title, documents, document, or having a sense of gender neutrality, such as this sentence here. Next, she, he should consult with an advisor. So those are only some of the uses of these of the parentheses. Now we go back to the more conventional uses of the parentheses. We have examples here, two examples. Sam, the boy from school, helped me with my homework. Now, we go back to the definition or the first slide. Is it essential information or is it supplementary information? You should be able really to tell here whether this is the information enclosed within the parentheses is it essential or is it non-essential information? What do you guys think? So I think, and I assume you also, that the information here enclosed between the parentheses can be removed, let's say. So if you read the sentence without reading the parentheses, let's say, Sam helped me with my homework. Is there anything wrong with that sentence? Sam helped me with my homework. I do not think so, okay? There is nothing wrong with that sentence. However, maybe I need to add more information. For example, I do not know who Sam is, or I want to introduce the readers to Sam, okay, to make that information clear. So in order to do that, we have parentheses, the tool that helps us, clarify things. So you can say Sam, who's Sam? The boy from school helped me with my homework, okay? So this is the most conventional and obvious use of the parentheses. Now, a different type of example here, the second one, the boy ate the ice cream cone, full stop, his favorite flavor was chocolate. So this is additional information. It's not pertinent to the sentence before it, but it adds further information, as we said. So it can be removed and the sentence before it still is a correct and complete sentence. Okay, now notice the difference here is that we have a full stop here and a full stop here. That is because both of those sentences, the one within the parentheses and the one outside the parentheses, are all, independent sentences. They are separate sentences. In this case, the punctuation mark, the period, is there to indicate that. Whereas here, this sentence within, or this part of the sentence within the parentheses is cannot stand alone, okay? The meaning in it is integral to the rest of the sentence. And therefore, we do not add any type of punctuation such as a period here or a comma. So that's that. Now, this is here an not uncommon use of parentheses, but we do not see it as much. So this is, I think, the only case in which parentheses are not used in pairs. Remember earlier, I told you that parentheses come in pairs. You have the one from the left and one from the right. This use here in this example is one of the rare uses in which you can only have one parenthesis and from one direction, okay? So a single closed parenthesis is sometimes used in place of a period when counting or numbering, okay? When counting or numbering, as in this example here. There are the three types of rock are igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary. So if you notice here, each number is followed by a parenthesis to its right. Now this is used in addition to the comma, and that's basically one of the only instances in which you can use parentheses or without, not in pairs, okay? And the final point here, the open parenthesis is not used in isolation. So you cannot use a single one just for one number. That is not a common use of that parenthesis. So now we'll talk about the punctuation that goes around parentheses, okay? Sometimes the information is inserted within the original sentence and is not a complete sentence of itself. Like the previous example here, the first example, that the information within the parentheses is not a complete sentence, okay? When that happens, we do not capitalize the section in the parentheses, and we do not put any type of punctuation at the very end of that, okay? So that's the rule for not putting a full stop or a period at the end of the parentheses here. So for in this example, Jenny, the girl that lives in the yellow house, invited you to her birthday party next week. So the parentheses here do not include full stop or comma or anything like that, because if you take this part inside the parentheses out and read it on its own, it does not make sense. It does not make a complete sentence. And that's the condition, okay? The condition is, does it make a complete sentence? If not, then you do not need to add a period. So on the other hand, here we have an example. Because the parentheses here are at the very end, you add a period or a full stop at the end here, okay? Because naturally, if a sentence is ending and it's complete, you need to full stop or add a period. So on the other hand, sometimes the information in the parentheses is a complete sentence on its own, okay? Separate from the original sentence. If that happens, we treat the words in the parentheses as a complete sentence by capitalizing the first letter and adding punctuation inside the parentheses, okay? Now the condition again is it a complete sentence and separate, independent from the previous one? If the conditions are met, then you can add the punctuation within the parentheses themselves, okay? Within the parentheses. For example, the children won their baseball game, full stop, that's the whole sentence, complete, separate. It was exciting, that's another sentence, and it has its own punctuation with the exclamation mark. The second example, I'm going to the park to play with Richard. Richard went to school with me. Notice here, this sentence is complete. Richard went to school with me. That's a complete sentence, separate from the one prior to it. Now we go back again to the information within the parentheses. Is it essential or is it not essential? Now let's look at the examples here. This is the example we previously talked about. Let's look at it without the parentheses. Jenny invited you to her birthday party next week. Now, is this a correct sentence? Jenny invited you to her birthday party next week. Okay. It is indeed a correct sentence. Now, why did we add then the information within the parentheses? It really depends on the context and the writer. But if you notice here, it is adding information that can be helpful. So the issue here is really all about being helpful. Okay, is the information adding something to the reader, adding something as like context, etc. If you add context within the parentheses, then you are using them correctly. The second example here, if you notice, the second, if you have the sentence without the parentheses after it, I'm going to the park to play with Richard. Okay, that's fine. The sentence is fine. But I could wonder, who's Richard? Okay, for example, there are more than one Richard. Okay, in that case, adding this information here can clarify lots and lots of things. Okay, so that's why we have parentheses, really. The same goes to the other examples, obviously. If you remove the parentheses, of course, you have a correct sentence. But again, context could be lacking. And then, only then you can use parentheses to restore that context and remove any vagueness from the sentence. Now, quickly, we'll go over this, things to avoid when using parentheses. They should not be used in immediate proximity to each other or within another set of parentheses. In that case, you use brackets, the square brackets or commas or dashes. So do not use parentheses in close proximity to each other and repetition in a row, okay? Avoid including more than one sentence or including an extensive sentence within the parentheses. This is a mistake that many students fall victim to, using too much information or going on and on and on within the parentheses. If you open the parentheses, you should be brief, you should be to the point, you add the extra information and you stop there. Do not continue going inside the parentheses. Of course, the parentheses should not also be longer, like 2 lines or more. That's very extreme, okay? Avoid using parentheses too frequently because it can indicate to the readers that you're not decisive in terms of which information to include or not, okay? So use them wisely. Do not overuse parentheses, like do not add parentheses in every single sentence or line. That's extensive use that is not necessary, okay? So the formatting of the text in the parentheses should be the same as the surrounding text. That's naturally, Times New Roman, size 12, etc. For example, the usual formatting. So the formatting of the text within the parentheses should be exactly the same as the text around it. Now let's go over some examples and try to guess which ones are correct and which ones are not. So get ready, guys. So the first one is, his attitude, in my opinion, is not helping. His attitude, in my opinion, is not helping. So which use of the parentheses here is correct? Is it A or is it B? So please type the correct answer in the chat. Which one of those two examples are correct? So remember, what you can do is the way to find out which one is correct is to remove the contents of the parentheses and read the sentence along without the parentheses. If it is correct without the parentheses, then that's the true actual use. Now, if it is a broken sentence, the structure is not correct, okay, then you realize that the use of that in that instance, the use of those parentheses is not correct, okay? Okay, let's see the answers in the chat. Very good. So everyone got it right. The first one, A, is the correct example here. Okay, his attitude, in my opinion, is not helping. Now let's read the sentence without the parentheses. His attitude is not helping. That's a complete sentence. That's an understandable sentence. Now let's go to the wrong option here and try to apply the same test. Try to apply the same test to this one. Now, the test is to read the sentence without the contents of the parentheses. That would be, in my opinion, is not helping. Is that a correct sentence? In my opinion, is not helping. That is not a correct sentence. We removed an integral, crucial part of the sentence. So therefore, you immediately know that this use of the parentheses is not correct. Now we move on to the second one here. We must be patriotic as expected of us to our nation. We must be patriotic as expected of us to our nation. Now, which one of those is correct? Okay, is it A or is it B? Again, remember to apply the test, which is to remove the contents of the parentheses and read the sentence. If it does make sense, then you can safely assume that the use of the parentheses is correct. If it does not make sense, then you can safely assume that the use of the parentheses is not correct. So let's give everyone time to guess correctly. Let's see. Very good, excellent. I think everyone got it correctly. So the test does work. So if we read the sentence here, B is the correct answer. If we read this sentence without the parentheses, it still makes sense. Okay, we must be patriotic to our nation. That makes sense. Now, if we read this one without the parentheses, be patriotic as expected of us to our nation, it sounds wrong, something is missing. So then we can assume that this use of parentheses is not correct. Right, moving on now to the second type here of punctuation that falls between the parentheses, brackets, etc. Now, remember, I must mention that between British English and American English, people use the word brackets and parentheses interchangeably, meaning that sometimes they say brackets and they mean the curved parentheses that we just talked about. And sometimes they say parentheses and they mean these ones, okay? But to clarify things, we always say square brackets, meaning these ones. If you hear or read square brackets, then you can safely assume that these are the ones meant by square brackets. Now let's see, just as we did with parentheses, can you find them on your keyboard? So if you don't mind, can you type them in the chat, for example? Brackets, these ones, the square ones, you will find them by pressing I think the shift key and the two keys next to the P letter on the keyboard, next to the P letter on the keyboard, to the right of the letter P. Very good. So you guys found them. Those are indeed the square brackets. Now you know where they are located on your keyboard. So what are those brackets and what are the uses of them? So brackets are placed around extra information in the text, especially comments made by an editor. Now, these brackets share some uses with the with the parentheses, but you have an extra or an additional condition here. So it is still extra information. So that applies to both parentheses and brackets. It's all extra information. But in the case of brackets, oftentimes they are used by people other than the author of the text. Okay, so for example, editors use brackets. People who review texts, who add things to the text, the original text. Now, so in other words, they are typically used for editorial comments, corrections, and clarifications. Okay, comments, editorial comments, corrections, and clarifications. So for example, you can use the brackets to add something into a sentence that was taken out by the writer. For example, if the writer is being vague, is not adding sufficient information, you as someone who's editing or overseeing that text, you can add information between the brackets that clarifies the writing of the author without, claiming to be the author himself or herself. That's an issue, of course. So whenever you see brackets like these, you can safely assume that's someone other than the author himself adding to the text. So again, you use it to make comments, explanations, for example, quoted material from other writers. We can put such comments in the brackets to show that they were not actually used by the speaker or the writer. Okay, so it is an important clarification, really important, to avoid, for example, plagiarism or other things, or claiming the identity of someone else. You need to use brackets, the square brackets, to clarify that you're just adding something to the comments or to the comments of the original writer. Okay, so comments can be explanations, adding further information, especially in vague texts. So again, you're adding contextual information with quoted material. For example, this is the first example. She spoke to Smith, where the brackets text replace one or more spoken words to provide clarity. In this example, I think something is missing here. This one should be, she spoke to him. Okay, I think him is missing here. So she spoke to him, and then that's the end of the quote. You, as someone who's trying to clarify who's him, you can add the name of that person between the brackets here. That is Smith. So him equals Smith, okay? So the original quote is she spoke to him. Now the editor would add Smith between brackets to clarify that she's speaking with a person called Smith, okay? It would replace the vague him because it lacks context, for example. Another use of the brackets here is you must come across this, especially in articles or interviews, reports, such as this sick means that there is an error, a mistake in the original text. So if you see it within the brackets, for example, like here, if you see it within the brackets, it means that the previous word is a mistake, either a grammatical mistake or a mistake in spelling, such as this example, okay? So if you see this word, which comes from Latin, then it means that there was an error made not by the editor or someone who transcribed that text. The error was made by the original author. So in order to clarify that, you add this word between brackets. So this is one of the most common uses of the bracket. So it is confirming that in quoted material, an error or confusing wording is faithfully reproduced from the original text and not a transcription error, meaning that, again, the error was made by the original author, and you as, for example, as an editor or someone who's transcribing that text, you did not make that error. The author made it. So you're basically assigning blame to the author and clarifying that you made no errors. Now we go back to one of the original uses of brackets, which is to give context and further information, okay? Now look at this sentence. He drove 60 on the highway to the city. Now 60 here could mean miles per hour or kilometers per hour or something entirely different, okay? We do not know. Now, I want you now to be the editor, okay? In the chat, use this sentence and add the brackets to use or add additional information to clarify the sentence. Now, let's see, do you use it correctly or not? Use the brackets, add to the sentence either 60 miles per hour or 60 kilometers per hour. Where does it fall? Okay, so it should fall after the number. Let's see it, guys. Come on. Use the brackets and choose either this one or this one. As an exercise, try and see if you make the correct decision as to where you place the brackets and what to include in the brackets. Okay. Okay, I'm going to look at the answers now. Very good, excellent. Those are indeed all correct. I see an answer that has a comma within the brackets. That is not necessary, okay? It is not necessary to add a comma within the brackets. Now, I think this here is not necessarily correct because the information needs to be immediately adjacent or immediately after the connection or the pertinent thing that you're trying to clarify. 60, that's the vague number, right? That's 60. We do not know is it 60 kilometers or miles, etc. Since it is the vague point in the sentence, you need to add the brackets after the number immediately, okay? You need to find the vague point in the sentence and add your clarification immediately after that, okay? So many of you, or most of you, did that correctly. Excellent. Now this is the way to do it. He drove 60 miles per hour. Notice that the brackets come immediately after the number because the vagueness stems from this point here. Miles or kilometers, that's doesn't make a difference. The important thing is that you clarified the vague part of the sentence. He drove 60 miles per hour on the highway to the city, okay? In this example, the information on in the brackets helps the reader understand the sentence. Now we have other examples here of editors intervening and clarifying a sentence, okay? The first one, Mark Twain said, it taught him all he ever knew about life. Now, if you read this sentence without the brackets, it's extremely vague. If you're not familiar with Mark Twain and his literary works, you will not understand what he means by it, okay? What is it? Now, the editor or whomever now intervened and clarified that Mark Twain means the river by it. It taught him all he ever knew about life. So you can see here, it's really essential, not something that you can do without, especially for people who do not have context. Again here, another example, Virginia Woolf lived with him while recovering from her illness. Now, if you put your finger on top of the content of the brackets, you'll not really understand who's him, okay? Now, the brackets do an important job here of identifying characters in works, for example, or in biographies, autobiographies. They basically add context, really essential context to the sentence. The last example here, there were few Eskimos living in the region we explored. Now, this is the use of one type of use of brackets that I told you about just a couple of slides ago. If there is a mistake made by the original author, you can add this word between brackets immediately after the mistake, and you will indicate basically that the error here is made by the author. Now, what's the error here? It is an error of spelling. It should be Eskimos, Eskimos, not this, whatever this word is, okay? This is a error of spelling, okay? So in order to indicate that, this was added to the text. Now, one could say, why don't they edit or rectify the original word? It goes back to originality and preserving the original words of the author, and not to make adjustments on behalf of the author. That's without his permission, for example. That is not acceptable in the world of editing, etc. So the differences between parentheses and brackets, real quickly, I think we took a long time here. Parentheses, again, to reiterate, review, they are used for text that is part of the original sentence but can be omitted. So it can be omitted. These are examples. We are very happy to see them, all of them. For more info, see chapter the birds, page 8. So this use here of referring to pages is very common, using parentheses, and within those parentheses, the number of the page that you are referring to. Another example here, I was very surprised, and it is pretty hard to surprise me. Now, this is additional information. It can be omitted. I was very surprised. That's enough for the sentence, but the author of this sentence chose to add additional information to explain further, okay? Now, brackets, on the other hand, they are typically used to explain or clarify the original text by an editor or someone who's transcribing that text, okay? For example, she is a great friend of us. Who's she? Martha, okay? Now that's explaining or adding further clarification to the sentence. Now here, this one was not, the name was not a part of the original sentence. The editor added it for clarification. Here, many ships left the port. Now, because there was an error of spelling, this editor chose, instead of adding sick, he added the correct spelling of the sentence immediately after the mistake. Again, the mistake was not mended, was not rectified, because that's not how it works, basically. If the author makes a mistake, it should be clarified after that mistake, okay? Now you can use both at the same time, both parentheses and brackets, okay? How do you do that? First, you open the brackets, the parentheses, and then within those parentheses, the brackets fall, the square brackets, okay? For example, in this sentence, the package includes several things, parentheses, mainly CDs. Now, CDs, it's an abbreviation. You can explain abbreviations within brackets, okay? You can explain them within brackets, and it is exactly what this sentence does here, okay? Now, the abbreviation compact disc, CD, is explained within the square brackets, and then the parentheses are closed. Then the sentence is finished, okay? Now we come to our final activity. We have two uses of brackets here. Which one is the accurate, correct use? He wrote, as we traveled across Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, the weather changed for the worse. B, he wrote, as we traveled across Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, the weather changed for the worse. Now, which one is the correct use of brackets here, guys? Let's see. Very good, very good. B is indeed the correct answer here. Why is that? Because Rhodesia has a different name now, and the editor of this text or this sentence would like to explain to, for example, modern readers, contemporary readers, if it is an old text, that uses the old names of all countries, the editor can clarify the issue here by using brackets and adding the modern name of that country or that place. Okay. Now, in this example, there's no reason to add brackets or to include the weather within the brackets because it needs no clarification here. What needs clarification is the name of this country that modernly is referred to as Zimbabwe, not Rhodesia. Okay, so in this case, this is a basic use, a correct basic use of the brackets here. Now, the last activity here, we have two examples here. Remember, I said this refers to a mistake and it should come after the mistake immediately. So which one here is correct? The notice read, in case of fire, please excite the building by the nearest door. Obviously, there is a mistake in this sentence. Is it, or is it this one? The notice read, in case of fire, please. It should be excite the building by the nearest door. So which one is the correct use of this clarification within the brackets? Is it A or is it B? Very good. Indeed, it is B. B is the correct use of this type of clarification within the brackets. Now, adding the clarification to the end of the sentence does not really help the reader, notice or be able to identify the mistake or the error immediately. But adding it after the error immediately is helping the reader understand that the mistake falls behind or before this, before the brackets here. Obviously, the mistake is excite, it should be exit. In this case, that is the correct use of this type of bracket. All right, guys, so this is all I have today. I hope that we learned something helpful, inshallah. And if you have questions, comments, please go ahead. I'd be happy to answer them and hear your comments. And if you have any suggestions, of course,